Welcome back. My name's Chris Hayward and I'm the Deputy Chairman of the Policy Committee of the Corporation of the City of London, and I'm delighted to be here this morning to host this next session for you. My thanks to Charlie at NatWest and the rest of the panel for their thoughts on the Sustainable Homes and Buildings Coalition. What this brings into sharp relief is the role of the customer in any deliberations on the transition. And I'm sure some of our panellists for this session will have views on how we mobilise civil society to achieve net zero in a UK context. And that is the focus of this session, the challenge and opportunity that transitioning the UK cities to net zero presents. If this COP is going to be a real inflection point, we need to absorb its lessons and deliver on its ambitions close to home, in our own urban environments and in the homes and offices of our populations. So, to get the full picture here, we brought together city leadership, private finance and policy expertise. And we're going to take a broad view of each of their pieces of the puzzle, from the leadership of local authorities via the blend of financing required to get investable propositions off the ground, to the role of institutional investors setting the pace through their own decisions. To that end, today I'm delighted to be joined here in the studio by Councillor Nicola Beech, who is the Cabinet Member for Climate, Ecology, Waste and Energy at Bristol City Council, a city which, following its award as European Green Capital in 2015, has led the way in embedding combating climate change into its policies and processes. And similarly here in the studio is Isabella Gornall, the chair of UK 100, the network of UK cities committed to net zero, of which I'm pleased to say the City of London is a part. And virtually, I'm joined by Nigel Wilson, the Group Chief Executive of Legal & General, such a significant institutional investor and one which is taking a lead in setting ambitious targets for the climate impacts of its own investments. And also virtually, I have Emma Harvey with me, Director at the Green Finance Institute, who counts the coalition for the energy efficiency of buildings amongst her portfolio. So let's make a start, if we may. Isabella, perhaps I can turn to you first of all. If I might start, last year UK 100 published a report on accelerating the rate of investment into local energy projects. How can the recommendations from that report be applied to support financing of regional net zero transitions?
Thank you so much. And it really was a very unique report. It was sponsored by Bays and Siemens, and it looked at Bristol, Cambridge, Leeds, Leicester, Manchester, and they had over 300 expert interviews to be able to come up with a really solid set of recommendations. And in that, it really set out that we have such a brilliant opportunity post-COVID with being able to create local energy systems which will allow consumers to be their own energy providers, with local generation, smart technologies, exciting storage systems to allow the balance between supply and demand. Now, of course, as we all know, rapid investment will reduce costs overall, which is something we should all be looking for, especially given the winter ahead. But local authorities are so unique with their democratic accountability and their powers and their ability to make investments and create jobs with reskilling and economic growth. So I think really to say with that entire package, what we need is the UK central government now to really recognise this and, you know, invest in Bays, for example, to be able to create a portfolio of upcoming investments that need to be invested in, and to be able to, you know, use the UK Investment Bank in a way that's actually allowing some of these Kickstarter schemes to get investment at an earlier stage.
Thank you very much indeed. Nigel, turning to you, and thank you for joining us virtually this morning. Legal and General has a long history of providing finance to local authorities and recently committed to make all new homes it builds operationally zero carbon by 2030. Therefore, what role do you see institutional investors playing in funding place-based decarbonisation?
Thank you for inviting me. I think in big picture terms, we don't think we're doing enough. We don't think anybody's doing enough. We don't think it's enough of a priority right now. And what we need is more willing leadership. And I would call out Bristol and Leeds with Marvin and Tom as really good examples of where we're seeing political leaders who are really committed to implementing policy change, which create a framework for you to invest into. You know, the world's awash with money, and it's pretty inexpensive money. And there are literally thousands of great startups in the UK that are starved of capital that needs to get institutionalized. And one example would be PodPoint, which is our electric vehicle charging business, where we partnered with EDF and we IPO'd that this week to give lots of other institutions the opportunity of providing the capital for the next phase. So we have principal capital and agency capital, and we've invested a few billion of our principal capital in various, good carbon change initiatives. But the real scale money comes when we put our agency capital to work. We probably have about $10 to $15 billion of principal capital, but we look after $2 trillion of agency capital, and that's the institutional capital. They're looking for investable opportunities, and we're just simply not creating enough of them right now in the UK. And you talked about insulation not being a sexy investment in the last session, but that's a good practical example. Retrofitting is a massive industry that should be created in the UK. Simply just not doing enough to get that off the ground, and it's a bit pathetic really. But there's lots of institutional capital will come when we start to scale it up. And PodPoint, we did that deal really to demonstrate that you can then bring in lots more institutional capital once you've begun to scale up these businesses. We're phenomenally excited about some of the specific cities across the UK and the progress they're making, and we'll be investing in, as you said, EPC A-rated houses, although most consumers don't differentiate very much between an A, B, C or a D house when they come to purchase it, and so there's a lot of education still required there. But the stuff that just isn't enough capital flowing in the industry to really make enough of a dent in the targets that we have right now. But there's enough embryonic ideas, there's enough startups, there's enough willing political leaders, particularly at the local level, that we think this will become a huge growth industry and maybe our biggest investment opportunity in the next 10 to 15 years.
Thanks, Nigel, very much indeed for that. Emma, welcome to you too, virtually. Over the summer, the Green Finance Institute launched a campaign to encourage councils to explore issuing a local climate bond. Do you see local climate bonds, can I ask you, playing an important role in financing the net zero transition?
Brilliant question, Chris. And absolutely, local climate bonds have the potential to raise significant volumes of capital for climate positive activities. The organisation that pioneered local climate bonds, Abundance Investments, has estimated that over £3 billion could be raised through local climate bonds if all the local councils in England issued them. Other estimates suggest that the potential scale of the local climate bond market is equally huge. One study suggesting that approximately 5% of annual local council borrowing could be via local climate bonds by 2030. So let's take a step back. What is a local climate bond? In effect, a local climate bond is a capital raising instrument issued by a local authority. But instead of being invested in by institutional investors, it's invested in by crowdfunders, in effect, local residents. And then the funds are used to be invested into green projects. So this could be from renewables to solar panels, to energy efficiency, to low carbon transport and EV charging, right through to rewilding of verges. And there are so many benefits that come through local climate bonds. They price cheaper than Public Works Loan Board, which is the main source of funding for local councils. But more importantly, they have a fantastic opportunity and fantastic way of engaging local citizens on the net zero agenda. Now, the Green Finance Institute and Abundance Investments launched the Local Climate Bonds campaign over the summer, which has been supported by UK 100, local partnerships, and by Innovate UK. Our campaign encourages local authorities to explore issuing a local climate bond within 18 months of this summit, and is also going to offer support and teachings to those councils who are investigating new and inclusive ways to raise funds for climate projects. Now, following a number of pilots by West Berkshire and Warrington in 2020, each of which raised £1 million, climate bonds have been gaining significant momentum. In the last 3 months, 7 councils from across England and Wales have pledged to explore issuing their own climate bond within 18 months of today. And the newest of these joining, which we are announcing today, are Camden and Telford, who we are absolutely thrilled to be part of this campaign. They have declared a climate emergency and are progressing their decarbonisation and greening strategies, and resident engagement is at their core. And just last month, Islington, who joined the pledge just a few weeks beforehand, launched their first local climate bond, which was the first to be ISA eligible. So really serious, tangible, real economy impacts happening through the local climate bonds market. And we're really hoping to scale this up over the next 18 months, as many councils as possible to get involved in this exciting new market. So if you are a local authority and you are interested in this, of course, please do get in touch with the Green Finance Institute. But to answer your original question, Chris, yes, local climate bonds can play a significant role in financing the net zero transition.
Emma, thanks very much. That's really great and positive news from you. Thank you very much for that. Nicola, welcome to our studio here in Glasgow. Bristol City Council was the first UK local authority to declare a climate emergency and to commit to becoming net zero by 2030. Since making that commitment in 2018, what lessons can you share on planning, financing and implementing a regional net zero transition, please?
Thank you, Chris, and I'm delighted to be here today on Cities Day to tell the story of Bristol and our journey so far. It's correct that we were the first city to declare a climate emergency, but I do think that we need to look back before we look forward, really. So since 2005, Bristol has been on its net zero journey, and we've put tens of millions of pounds into renewable technologies and energy in and around the city so far. We met our 2020 corporate carbon reduction target 3 years early. So by 2017, we'd met our target reduction. And I think that gave us the confidence that actually this was going to be something that if it could happen anywhere, it could happen in Bristol. To answer your question about kind of what it actually means on the ground, it's ferociously practical. And I hope that people watching this will be kind of buoyed by that, because the truth is that actually meeting the climate emergency is around setting the city up for that sort of success that you need. You need economists and people that can use spreadsheets. And, so we're a city that's environmental action is at the heart of Bristol. But actually, the truth is the kind of skills that we need in local authorities to get to this net zero target is hyper practical, and that's one of the challenges I'm sure we'll come on to, really, is about how do we resource that and how do we work collaboratively across all the core cities in the country to achieve the skills and specialisms that we need to get there. There's a nice combination between practicality and activism, I think, is probably also an important thing to mention. And on the practicalities and the finance side of it, we know it will cost between £9 and £10 billion to decarbonise Bristol. It's absurd to think that business rates and taxpayers' council tax is going to fund that, right? So it was quite a moment of reckoning in 2019 when we sort of saw the start line. Let's get the data. We've not talked about data yet, I'm sure we will, but the power of data really in understanding where is our start point. And every city is in a different place on that. So we understood our start point, and then it was, okay, so what's the cost and how are we going to do it? And if the Mayor Marvin Rees was here today, he'd be saying, show me the money. So we understood the start point. And so it was then a task of, okay, so how do we start to chip away at that? And to be blunt, as a city, we're just not prepared to wait for government. And so in 2018, we launched something called City Leap. One of your previous speakers talked about it earlier, to try and create that public-private partnership to kind of just take control of this issue. You know, nothing will happen if we just stand by and hope someone comes knocking on our door. So we set up City Leap, and we're now currently going through the procurement for that. But lots of things that we've just talked about today. Our hope is that by bundling our assets in terms of actually how do we attract private finance into our city in a way that works for the financial sector, it challenges some of the norms around the relationships between the private sector and local authorities, but also fundamentally for us as a decarbonisation project, start, middle and end. You know, we need to get these schemes scaled. We've done a lot ourselves, but not at the scale that will get us anywhere near 2030, and I don't think there's a city in Britain that can claim that. And so I'm really hopeful by the middle of next year we'll have that procurement in place. It's a 20-year concession, a 20-year relationship essentially between a private partner and the city, and really scale up those decarbonisation projects. So just very quickly, that is our expanding our district heating network, the massive task of refurbishing and retrofitting our social housing projects, and there's lots of other energy and transport projects in the city as well.
Nicola, thanks very much indeed for that. Isabella, let me come back to you. Boris has gone back to London, probably feeling quite pleased with himself in terms of COP26. What do you think the most important priority that the UK government can do to support local authorities now is?
Thank you. It's you know, this is such a major moment, not just for the whole world, but for the UK government and for the Prime Minister to sort of host this major summit. And I think it has been a gift to the environment sector, really, because we've been able to use it as such a big hook to say we must keep pushing. And, you know, we have to make sure that even though we are calling for big global ambition, that actually getting our own house in order is also hugely important, and making sure that we can actually say that the UK is leading here. Yesterday I spoke to an Australian Member of Parliament who said that he thought we were very brave for all of our electric vehicle targets, and he said we would never do that in Australia yet. And you know, which I just think says so much, not just about the actual ambition here, but also about the fact that where the UK is, and the fact that all of the polling shows how much the public wants this transition. So I think in terms of managing to get the local authority agenda now back in the heart of number 10 versus this big global stage, I'd like him to really focus on the UK Investment Bank, because they've set this up and they have promised £100+ million to a project in Teesside, for example, but that was very much sort of an oven-ready deal, whereas actually there are so many projects across the UK that are at a much smaller scale, but also need more investment to be able to be oven-ready. And I think that being able to get a crack team inside the investment bank to support local authorities to be able to actually pitch in for this money, but also for them to be able to share knowledge and get access to some of these funds would be really important. And UK 100 worked out that with just £5 billion worth of investment, they would be able to unlock £100 billion for local authorities. So that would be a really big step.
Super. Thanks, Isabella, for that. Nigel, I'd like to bring you back in by asking you a question, if I may, about how we can encourage stronger public-private partnerships to drive all this forward.
Yeah, I think we're lucky. I mean, Bristol is probably the best city in the UK at the moment at thinking through the future of how we get to net zero, and has correctly identified a process. You know, we're heavy investors alongside Bristol, in Bristol, and everybody needs to get out more and look at more things and then get inspired by what others are doing. I mean, the best city in the world for electrification is undoubtedly Shenzhen, which is in China. Most people haven't been there to look at what can be achieved. You know, all their buses, all their cars, everybody rides bikes. You know, some of the most sophisticated companies then coexist and operate in those cities. And I think Bristol is maybe 5 to 10 years behind, but it's certainly driving forward. we're encouraged by the political leadership and that they're actually focusing more on place than politics. Finally, it's taken a very long time, but if you listen to the Andes, Burnham and Streets, they sound very similar in how they're promoting, Birmingham and Manchester, and I think that's great that they're looking for proper partnerships between the public and private sector. I don't think that they should be relying totally on central government, and that's certainly been a criticism we've had in the past of cities in the UK. They've got to get on and do stuff, experiment with stuff, work in partnerships to get there. We like the Bristol structure, the ideas that are coming through there. We like what Leeds is trying to do. Many of our cities outside of London are actually quite small, and therefore they're bite-sized, and you can actually make a huge difference very, very quickly in those areas. There are things like retrofitting housing, which again I go back to, where there isn't one place in the whole of the UK that's actually doing a good job on that right now, which is really quite poor. I think the promotion of ground source and air source and district heating is, if it was 1 out of 10 last year, it's 2 this year. So we've improved a lot, but we're way behind where we need to get to. All the technology exists. I think the financing exists. I think the political will is still very low. And customer acceptance and customer education is really quite poor right across the UK. And so there's a huge task to be done in educating people why these are good things to happen. But we do need, brave local politicians who want to step up, have a vision, and then execute around that vision. But their situational analysis has to be honest. And there isn't enough honest situational analysis right now across the UK.
Thank you very much, Nigel, for that. Emma, can I bring you back in again as well? We heard some strong articulation of global city perspectives in the opening keynotes. What lessons do you think the UK cities can learn from our international peers?
So one of the models we've seen be very successful internationally is the use of blended finance, to call on some of the points that Nigel and Elizabeth brought up earlier. So being able to use green banks in order to deliver financial solutions that have risk-adjusted returns that are attractive to private investors, so they will come into these low-carbon investments, but also achieve a significant multiplier effect for those public funds. I think the OECD estimates that a credit enhancement guarantee can bring in 2 to 10 times the capital that the public sector puts up for those. So, for instance, an example, if we're talking around buildings and retrofitting that have been successful in the United States, is the use of property-linked financing, sometimes known as PACE financing in the United States. We've seen, for instance, the DC Green Bank get involved in supporting these schemes being set up. And rather than financing being linked to an individual, which is the norm in the UK, the financing is linked to a property. So it helps to break down some of those barriers that Nigel was talking about that homeowners face when they're looking to improve the energy efficiency of their home. So leveraging blended finance is important. I think the other critical piece, though, is really building capacity within local authorities so that they either have the right skills in-house to be able to establish these decarbonisation plans and to run forward with these strategies, but also to collaborate and building connections with organisations who can support. So, there's been fantastic work led by the UK Green Building Council with their Accelerator Cities programme, and connecting local authorities in with innovative, pioneering financial institutions who will be willing to explore new financial ideas, as we've seen in cities such as Bristol and Leeds and the other pioneering cities in this space.
Thanks very much indeed. Nicola, I'm aware of your work with the UK Cities Climate Investment Commission. Could you tell us something about their work and what it involves, please?
Yeah, absolutely. The UK Climate Investment Commission is a panel which Marvin Rees on Mayor of Bristol is involved in, and it's been a phenomenal experience for Bristol, actually, to kind of come together. I think it's always nice when people say nice things about Bristol, of course, but the truth is that it's way more complicated than that, right? And we are so much stronger together as cities. So we are one of the core cities. We're not the biggest city, as the point that was mentioned earlier, but we're rapidly growing. And so for us to be able to work with fellow organisations and work with some amazing leaders around kind of the how do we do this and how do we become resilient to growth, but also encourage growth and continue kind of Bristol's journey. I'm not sure if you're aware of the report that was recently published, which was really interesting, which essentially sets out kind of what the role of government is, which is something we've talked about before in this panel, around how do we actually enable cities. You know, it's okay for nations to make commitments, but it's the cities that will deliver. And I think that's okay. You know, there's nothing to fear there. Like that actually gets us all to the same end goal. And so it's been a really brilliant experience to be involved in that. I think the other thing personally that this whole way of linking cities works is when we all think about our shared priorities about the people that we are responsible for supporting, and actually our time in office is relatively short, which obviously often private sector organisations get bamboozled by the idea that, you know, you're not around for that long relative to the history of the city. And so it enables us to kind of share our sort of shared values around the implementation of SDGs as an example. So you're looking at finance but through an outcomes lens, and you're making sense of what are complicated and blurry cities, and the SDGs have been a great platform to do that. And so these kind of commissions and the work that we do together is a great platform to be able to articulate that in less of an abstract way and in a very real way about what we actually need to then deliver on these challenges.
Okay, thanks a lot for that, Nicola. I'm going to ask you all one sort of final question, fairly brief answers on it, if you could please. But what is the single most important action, initiative, policy or programme needed to accelerate the financing of regional net zero transitions? And I'm going to start with you, Isabella. Why not?
Thank you. I think actually communicating to the public and allowing them to understand what they can also access, whether there are local crowdfunding schemes or others, and actually what they can do within their local area with retrofitting electric vehicle charge points, understanding what their options are, I think is actually a very good start. And I think that there should be a big national campaign to improve that, because policies are fantastic, but if we don't bring the public with us, we won't make it work.
Thanks, Isabella, for that. Nigel, over to you.
Retrofitting housing. We're currently, 23, 25 million houses need retrofitting. We're doing, a few hundred a year right now. Our performance is pathetic. There's US and Germany are doing a little bit better, but nobody's doing really well. And until we tackle that, and make retrofitting housing sexy, spend your money on buying a Tesla, or you retrofit your house. There's a huge saving, and there's an educational process to getting people properly engaged in doing that happen. And probability of that happening, I think at the moment is very small. So we have to change that.
Thanks, Nigel, very much. Emma, your thoughts, please.
So I'll come back to the point I said earlier, which is cross-sectoral collaboration, but I would caveat that or add to that saying with a real focus on delivering in the near term. We've had the time for talking, we've had the time for analysis. We need to start acting, we need to start deploying capital. So I'd point to something like Greater Manchester's Retrofit Task Force, which is bringing together local actors, financial institutions, the supply chain to try and collaboratively develop a rapid to market plan. I think that's going to be vital if we want to save the planet, if we want to create a green economy, and if we want to create a cleaner and equitable built environment for all.
Thanks, Emma, very much. Nicola, the last word is yours.
Thank you very much. Autonomy would be the top of my list. I think cities and regions, as I said, this week we're all going for the win-win right here, so we can actually move this country forward. So I think the autonomy and what that gives us is long-term planning ability and long-term stability, which I think is absolutely critical to these major infrastructure projects. Briefly speak about climate resilience. So one of the things that we have to get decarbonised, but we also have to adapt. And so one of the biggest challenges in Bristol is flood defences, and that's one of the reasons why that idea of autonomy and the ability to raise finance ourselves would be critically important to us. So they would be the two things I would be asking for.
Thank you all very much. So many thanks to all our panellists for such a stimulating discussion. Really enjoyed it. A great deal of candour on what we all need to do to secure net zero future for our urban environments, and a rallying cry, I would suggest, not just for local leaders, but for national leaders as well. So thank you all very much for participating in the panel session this morning.